On Law Weekly today, we stick with issues of defilement, sexual abuse, and violence against women and the girl child. We talk to a woman who has done and is doing tremendous work championing the rights of women and girls. Itoro Eze-Anaba is the founder of the Mirabel Center, an organization which provides succor for victims of rape and sexual assault, the first of its kind in Nigeria. Also on this episode of the program, we bring some of the highlights from the launch of the COVID-19 ADR initiative, plus our weekly recap of some of the top trending stories from the courtrooms. That's our lineup on this episode of the program. Hello and welcome. I'm Shola Shoyeli. My guest is a legal practitioner with a bias for issues concerning the protection of the girl child and women. In the year 2000, she mobilized nationwide support for Nigeria's first domestic violence bill. And in 2013, she started the Mirabel Center located at the Lagos State University Teaching Hospital, the first sexual assault referral center in the country, which has helped over 3,000 victims of rape, providing them with free forensic medical and counseling services. She's widely respected and regarded for her work and is a recipient of the Queen of England's Commonwealth Point of Light Award. Mrs. Itoro Eze-Anaba is my guest on this episode of Law Weekly. You've done so much work and advocacy, speaking out against issues of rape, domestic violence, child abuse, but what would you attribute the sudden upsurge that we're seeing to?
Well, I would say that rape was a pandemic before the pandemic. We just were not talking about it. We just simply ignored it. But the fact that, there was a lockdown, the only news we had was about the lockdown. And so a lot of people now started noticing the high number of people that were being abused. And I was speaking to someone and I asked the question and said, if the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic had started in Nigeria, would we have realized that violence against women was a pandemic? But because it started elsewhere, and in those countries, they recognize the fact that violence against women was a pandemic within the pandemic. So we got to, we became conscious of it before we started noticing it and documenting it. So there's always been violence against women, rape, sexual abuse, child sexual abuse. It's always been a pandemic, but we had just, ignored it. We have refused to do anything about it. But then suddenly the COVID-19 pandemic came in. So before the pandemic, there was rape as its own pandemic that was, ignored. During pandemic, yes, there was rape. After, there will still be rape. But the important question that runs through it all is, what did we do before? What are we doing now? What will we do after? So people don't understand the implications of rape. People trivialize it. They think it's just sex. People think, get on with your life. Get on with it. Yes, it happened. So we ignored it for a long time. The laws that were available were not being enforced. The law enforcement agents, particularly the police, for a long time were not focusing on gender-based violence. So it was ignored. It was not termed a serious crime. You can even see it from the guidelines during the pandemic. Providers of frontline services, they were not tagged as essential services. There was no guideline on dealing with sexual and gender-based violence. So everything was about the pandemic. So there was nothing in place to support survivors. So it was not in anybody's consciousness. It was not in the government officials' consciousness. People ignored it. People felt it was the woman's fault. And then when you also look back to the many years of oppression, it's rooted in patriarchy and power play. So where a society where women are oppressed and their rights are not recognized, the issues affecting women are trivialized, whether there's a pandemic or not, that's how it's going to be. So we had allowed it to get to a level where we did not think it was important enough, or we did not see a woman's body as being worthy of protecting. We did not connect the dots between violence, child sexual abuse, and the violence in the society. When there is evidence that a child sexual abuse contributes a high percentage to the violence in the society, and it also contributes to drug abuse. It contributes to suicide rates in the society. So if we want to bring an end to violence in the society, we need to look back. We need to check child sexual abuse. We need to check domestic violence. We need to check intimate partner abuse, because that is where it's coming from. A child that witnesses violence is going to grow up thinking that violence is a normal way of life. And so it continues, in that manner. So we really need to sit down and look at what is going on. What are the root causes? How do we, what kind of system do we put in place? What kind of structure do we put in place? One, to prevent it. Secondly, to provide support to survivors. And thirdly, to prosecute.
Rape is regarded as an offense against the state, and there are a plethora of laws against it. But would you say that those laws are adequate? Because we're still seeing an increase in the cases.
It's one thing to have laws. It's another thing to enforce the law. It's also another thing for the law to be survivor friendly. If the law is not survivor friendly, survivors will not use it. They'll be afraid of using it. For instance, if the law says when I have to report at the police station, and I go to a police station where the officers don't understand what I need, because the police is the first contact with the criminal justice system, and I meet a police officer that trivializes my case, and then I walk away, I don't go back. That's a clear case of the law not working in my favor. Or the law says this is the evidence that they need, and I'm not able to provide the evidence. Or the police officer that's investigating my case does not have the required skills to get the evidence from the crime scene. So he cannot present anything in court as in support of my claim. So that's another way the system is not friendly. Whose responsibility is it to prove that the person was raped? What is the standard of proof? And also, where there's a delay in justice, and then the survivor goes to court for 5 years, for 3 years, for more, much longer than she's willing to. So she stops going. So that means
that's another trauma.
Yeah, exactly. So the survivor is not interested in the law. So that means this legal system as it is not in favor of the survivor. So like I said, it's one thing to have the legal framework. It's beautiful, it's fine. But how friendly is it to a survivor? And how is it being enforced? So we need to look at it from the courtroom to the guidelines to the prosecution to investigation. Everything has to be holistic and everything has to be looked at. So it's not just enough to have the law. Is the law friendly to a survivor? Is a survivor willing to go through that long process in order to get justice? If she is not, why? So we need to look into that.
So in terms of specifics, what can we do differently to change the narrative as individuals, as a society, as government, and even as law enforcement agents?
For the society, one of the things that makes it difficult for survivors is the fact that they are stigmatized, victim blaming, and then the whole issue is trivialized, so that the survivor becomes traumatized. So where did you go to? Why did you go there? So if it has stayed 2-3 years, okay, why didn't you report at the time? Forgetting that it's not your story, it's the survivor's story. She needs to be comfortable enough to tell the story. And if you work closely with survivors, a survivor may go to the police station and tell what happened. She leaves the police station, she comes to the Mirabel Center, and then she gives a more detailed information of what had happened. It doesn't mean that she lied. It's just that as a survivor, she will remember and recall in bits and pieces. Because she's still trying to process it. So the fact that she told me something else and told the police another thing does not mean that she's lying. So that's why it's very important that if you're dealing with a survivor, you need to understand what she's going through. You need to be able to know that this person in front of me is traumatized. You need to know that as someone that has been traumatized as a result of that incident, there are certain things she's going through. There are ways that she has to deal with it. She has to process it herself before she can tell you. So you're not in a hurry to just condemn her and say, oh, she's telling lies. If years down the line, she will still recall bits and pieces, because that's the healing process. Even when you go to court and the matter is thrown out, it doesn't mean that it did not happen. It only means that the state was not able to prove that it happened. Even when I say, oh, okay, I made a statement that it happened, and then I'm withdrawing that statement. I may withdraw it not because it didn't happen, but because I'm suddenly not comfortable with the reaction from others. So I withdraw back into my shell. So it is important that we as members of the society, that we need to understand what the survivor goes through. We need to speak about the rapist. I always say, let's change the narrative. Instead of saying, oh, this girl was abused, oh, this is what happened, she was raped and all that, let's focus on the rapist, because the rapist is the criminal here. Let's say, oh, this person is a rapist. Let's call him out. If you're his friend, call him out. If you know, because they don't live in a vacuum. They live in homes. So let's begin to say, this person is a rapist. And let's begin to take responsibility and say, it would not happen on my street.
You talked about law enforcement agents, and they are often, as you said, the first point of call. What can we do to make them more humane and do their job more efficiently?
You see, until I started working with the Mirabel Center, I had a very bad opinion of police officers. But in the past 6 or almost 7 years, I've come across quite a number of police officers that are committed, passionate, and humane when it comes to the issue of rape and sexual violence. There are so many of them that are using their personal funds to take care of survivors, to go to the crime scene, to go to the crime scene and ensure that what needs to be done is being done. Now you need to ask yourself, what is the budget for each police station? What do they get? Do they have the car to take them to the crime scene? Do they have the materials, writing materials, to even do their work? Do they have the kits so that when they go to the crime scene, they don't contaminate the crime scene? Do they have the skills and the knowledge of how to work the crime scene? Do they have forensic cameras? What exactly do police officers have in order to enforce the law, in order to protect survivors? So we need to begin to look at funding for the police. Secondly, there's need for the police to have a unit specially dedicated to rape and sexual violence. I'm not talking about family support units in the state. That is very good. But the funding for SGBV should come from the national level. I always say that we need to have a unit dedicated and exclusive to SGBV at the national level. Now, what will happen is that members of that unit will be trained, they'll be skilled, they'll be equipped with everything they need in order to investigate and prosecute cases of rape.
Our children are at home now because of the pandemic, and you've said that rape is a pandemic within the pandemic. What are the tips that you can give us from your experience of what to look out for? What should parents be telling their children? What should they be looking out for? Because oftentimes, as you said, the perpetrator is close within the house, somebody that the children trust and they are familiar with. So what are the tips that we should look at? What are the things that we should look at? What are the tips that we should give our children? And in terms of assessing justice, how can we seek help?
I will always encourage parents to have close relationship with their children. Your child should be able to tell you anything at any time. You know, at times you're tired, you just want your me time. And a child comes to talk to you, listen to your child at all times, because you never can tell what that child wants to tell you at that particular time. So open communication. Know your children's friends. Know who they are hanging out with. It's very important. If your child is going next door, know who is next door. Children sleep over in their friends' home. The home may be safe, but you don't know if that home, if there's a visitor in that home. You don't know who is the next door neighbor to that, to where your child is going for a sleepover. So just be interested in your child and know what is going on in your child's life. Now, if it is reported, if your child reports to you that something has happened, believe your child. Always believe your child, especially when you have had a discussion about what is good touch and what is bad touch. So we need to remember that rape, sexual abuse, takes away your humanity. It takes something away from you, but it also leaves something in you. It's such that you can't throw it away. It's with you throughout your lifetime. As the Bible said, it's the last thing I remember before I sleep. It's the first thing I remember when I get up. And then she still goes out, she does her makeup, she does her hair, she goes out smiling, but deep inside, she doesn't forget it. So rape destroys, it maims, it kills. So that is why all of us need to stand up against rape. We need to let people know that it is wrong, it is a crime, and it destroys life. Until we get to that level where we are angry enough to know that rape damages, then we will not be able to get to happen. But then, if you come to the Mirabel Center, we'll just be able to help you on that journey. We'll hold your hand and make sure that you get to the point where you are able to deal with the trauma that you went through.